Appendix VII. Letter of Judge Augustus B. Woodward to Colonel Proctor concerning the survivors of the Chicago Massacre. Footnote 967, copied from the original rough draft of the letter in the Detroit Public Library. The letter as actually sent differed slightly from the rough draft. The latter is presented here with all its erasures and changes. Words and phrases crossed out in the original manuscript are printed in italics and placed within brackets. Michigan Oct. 712. Sir, it is already known to you that on Saturday the 15th day of August last, an order having been given to evacuate Fort Dearborn, an attack was made by the savages of the vicinity on the troops and persons appertaining to that garrison, on their march, and at the distance of about 3 miles from the fort and the greater part of the number barbarously and inhumanly massacred. 3 of the survivors of that unhappy and terrible disaster, having since reached this country, I have employed some pains to collect the number and names of those who were not immediately slain, and to ascertain whether any hopes might yet be entertained of saving the remainder. It is on this subject that I wish to interest your feelings, and to solicit the benefit of your interposition, convinced that you estimate humanity among the brightest virtues of the soldier. On the policy of associating uncivilized men in the hostile operations of civilized powers, or on the rules and limitations on which a savage force, if employed at all, should be regulated, I will say nothing, because I am impressed with a strong conviction that if any British officer had been present on this melancholy occasion, the consequences would have been extremely different, infinitely less to be regretted. I find, sir, that the party consisted of 93 persons. Of these, the military, including officers, non-commissioned officers, and privates, amounted to 54. The citizens not acting in a military capacity consisted of 12. The number of women was 9, and that of the children 18. The whole of the citizens were slaughtered, 2 women and 12 children. Of the military, 26 were killed at the time of the attack, and accounts have arrived of at least 5 of the surviving prisoners having been put to death in the course of the same night. There will remain then 23 of the military, 7 women and 6 children, whose fate, with the exception of the 3 who have come in, and of 2 others who are known to be in safety at St. Joseph's, remains to be yet ascertained. Of these, amounting in all to 31 persons, I will furnish you with the names of all that I have been able to identify. First, there is one officer, a lieutenant, of the name of Linna T. Helm, with whom I have had the happiness of a personal acquaintance. His father is a gentleman of Virginia and of the first respectability, who has since settled in the state of New York. He is an officer of great merit and the most unblemished character. The lady of this gentleman, a young and amiable victim of misfortune, was separated from her husband. She was delivered up to her father-in-law, who was present. Mrs. Helm was transported into the Indian country 100 miles from the scene of action and has not since been heard of at this place. Second, of 6 non-commissioned officers, 4 survived the action. John Crozier, a sergeant, Daniel Doherty, a corporal, and 1 other corporal by the name of Bowen. The other is William Griffin, a sergeant who is now here. With these may be included John Pfeiffer Smith, a fifer. Third, of the privates it is said that 5, and it is not known how many more were put to death in the night after the action. Of those who are said to have thus suffered, I have only been able to collect the names of 2, Richard Gamer and James Latte. Mr. Burns, a citizen severely wounded, was killed by a squaw in the daytime about an hour after the action. There will thus remain to be accounted for, of whom I can only give the following names. Micajah Dennison and John Fury were so badly wounded in the action that little hope was indulged of their recovery. Dyson Dyer, William Nelson Hunt, Duncan McCarty, Augustus Mott, John Smith Sr., father of John Smith before named as A. Pfeiffer, James Van Horn. Fourth, of the 5 women whose fate remains to be ascertained, I am enabled to give the names of all. They were Mrs. Bum's wife to the citizen before mentioned as killed after the attack, Mrs. Holt, Mrs. Lee, Mrs. Needs, Mrs. Simmons. Among these women were 6 children saved out of the whole number, which was 18, part of them belonging to the surviving mothers and part to those who were slain. As to the means of preserving them, I can only suggest the sending a special messenger to that quarter charged with collecting the prisoners who may survive and transmitting them to Michilimackinac. A communication to Capt. Roberts at that place may cooperate. Chicago prisoners, Oct. 7, 1812. Appendix VIII. Muster roll of a company of infantry, under the command of Capt. Nathan Heald in the 1st Regiment of Infantry, commended by Colonel Jacob Kingsbury, from the 20th of April, when last mustered to the 31st of May, 1812. Footnote 968. Printed for the first time from the original manuscript among the Heald papers in the Draper collection. Date of to what time remarks and no. Names rank appointment engaged or names present alterations since or enlistment enlisted last muster Nathan Heald Capt. Janny 1807. Nathan Heald Lena T. Helmd Lute. 15 Decker 1808. Lena T. Helm George Ronan Ensign March 1811. George Ronan Isaac N. Van Sergen Mate 1 March 1811. Isaac N. Van Voorhis Isaac Holt Sergeant Apple. 1811-22 Apple. 1816 Isaac Holt Otho Hayes, Apple. 1811-23 Apple. 1816 Otho Hayes John Crozier, July 1808 to July 1813 John Crozier W.M. Griffith, May 1812, 1 May 1817 W.M. Griffith joined by enlisting at this place, 1 May 1812. Thomas 4th Corporal July 1807, 6, July 1812 Those. 4th Joseph Bowen, Apple 1811-22, Apple 1816 Joseph, Bowen George Burnett Pfeiffer July 1811, 1 July 1816 George Burnett John Smith, Apple. 1811-22 Apple. 1816 John Smith Hugh McPherson Drummer Oct. 1807-20 Oct. 1852 Hugh McPherson John Hamilton, July 1808, 5 July 1813 John Hamilton John Allen Private Nov. 1810-27 Nov. 1815 John Allen George Adams, Aug. 1811-21 Aug. 1816. George Adams Presley Andrews, Apple. 1811-11 Apple. 1816 Presley Andrews James Corbin, Oct. 1810-2 Oct. 1815 James Corbin Fielding Corbin Private Oct. 1811-25 Oct. 1816 Fielding Corbin Asa Campbell, Janny 1810-26 Janny 1815 Asa Campbell Dyson Dyer, Oct. 1810, 1 Oct. 1815 Dyson Dyer Stephen Draper, Apple. 1811-19 Apple. 1816 Stephen Draper Daniel Doherty, Aug. 1807-13 Aug. 1812 Daniel Doherty re-enlisted 1st June 1812. 10 Micajah Dennison, Janny 1811-23, Janny 1816 Micajah Dennison, 11 Nathan Edson, Apple. 1810-6 Apple. 1815 Nathan Edson 12 John Fury, March 1808 19 March 1813 John Fury sick. 13 Paul Grummo, Oct. 1810 1 Oct. 1815 Paul Grummo 14 Richard Garner, Oct. 1810 2 Oct. 1815 Richard Garner 15 W.M. N. Hunt, Oct. 1810 8 Oct. 1815 W.M. N. Hunt 16 Nathan A. Hurt, Dec. 1811-29 Dec. 1816 Nathan A. Hurt 17 Rhodias Jones, Dec. 1807 9 Dec. 1812 Rhodias Jones 18 David Kinnison, March 1808 14 March 1813 David Kinnison 19 Samuel Kilpatrick, Dec. 1810 20 Dec. 1815 Samuel Kilpatrick 20 John Kelso, May. 1812-3, May 1817 John Kelso, joined by re-enlisting 21 Jacob Landon, Nov. 1807-28 Nov. 1812 Jacob Landon at this place 3d May 1812. 22 James Latta Apple. 1810-10 Apple. 1815 James Latta 23 Michael Lynch, Dec. 1810-23 Dec. 1815 Michael Lynch 24 Hugh Logan, Febby. 1811 5 Febby. 1816 Hugh Logan 25 Frederick Locker, Apple. 1810 13 Apple. 1815 Frederick Locker 26 August Mort, Apple. 1811 9 Apple. 1816 August Mort 27 Peter Miller. July 1811 24, July 1816 Peter Miller 28 Duncan McCarty, Aug. 1807 31 Aug. 1812 Duncan McCarty 29 W.M. Moffat, Janie. 1811 23 Janie. 1816 W.M. Moffat 30 Elias Mills, Oct. 1811 26 Oct. 1816 Elias Mills 31 John Needs, July 1808 5, July 1813 John Needs 32 Joseph Knowles, Sept 1810 8, Sept 1815 Joseph Knowles 33 Thos. Poindexter, Sept 1810 3, Sept 1815 Thos. Poindexter sic. 34 W.M. Prickett, March 1811 7, March 1816 W.M. Prickett 35 Frederick Peterson, June 1808 7, June 1813 Frederick Peterson 36 David Scherer, Oct. 1810 1 Oct. 1815 David Scherer 37 John Suttonfield, Sept 1807 8, Sept 1812 John Suttonfield 38 John Smith, Apple. 1808 2 Apple. 1813 John Smith 39 James Starr, Nov. 1809 18 Nov. 1814 James Starr 40 John Simmons, March 1810 14 March 1815 John Simmons 41 James Van Horn, May 1810 2, May 1815 James Van Horn. The roll concludes with a table of recapitulation, a certificate as to its correctness, signed by Heald and Van Voorhis, and a certificate by Heald, dated Louisville, December 3, 1812, that the foregoing is a true copy of the original muster roll. Appendix IX. The Fated Company, a discussion of the names and fate of the whites involved in the Fort Dearborn massacre. No comprehensive record of the names and fate of those who composed the company which marched out of Fort Dearborn under Captain Heald on the morning of August 15, 1812, has ever been made. Here, for the first time, 100 years after the massacre, an effort is made to supply such a record. Such success as has been achieved is due to a study, in addition to the sources of information which have been used by previous workers in the local historical field, of several new sources unknown to or unused by students hitherto. The most important of these is the Fort Dearborn muster roll for May 31, 1812. This, together with the list of survivors given by Lieutenant Helm, the data left by Captain Heald, and the letter of Judge Woodward to Colonel Proctor, constitutes the basis of the present study. Footnote 969. Aside from the Fort Dearborn muster roll for May 31, 1812, the papers left by Heald which are of chief importance for our subject are the following: the official report of the evacuation, Appendix IV. Heald's Journal, Appendix III. The Fort Dearborn quarterly returns for the quarter ending June 30, 1812. The monthly return for June, 1812. A tabular statement concerning the troops engaged in the massacre and their fate. A summary statement concerning the women and concerning the men who perished in captivity. With the exception of the official report, all of these papers are in the Draper collection. At the outset of the effort to name and account for the members of the fatal company, a difficulty is encountered concerning the precise number of regular soldiers in Heald's company. In his official report, Heald stated that his force of regulars numbered 54. Whether he intended to include himself in this number is not clear. The tabular statement, preserved among his papers, of the composition of his force and its fate, which gives the total strength of his company as 54, exactly one half of whom were slain, would seem to indicate that he did. Yet the latter document disagrees with the report in the number of slain, which the report gives as 26. Turning to Heald's journal, we find the number of soldiers slain in the battle placed at 26, and the number of survivors at 27, which would give a total strength of 53. There is reason for believing that the number of regulars slain in the battle was, in fact, 26, but it is manifestly impracticable to determine certainly, from the accounts left by Heald, the exact strength of his company on the morning of the massacre. Heald had, to the end of his life, the garrison muster roll for May 31, 1812, and other contemporary records, and these are still preserved. An examination of them suggests an explanation of the reason for his conflicting statements. The garrison muster roll for May 31 and the monthly return for June each show a strength of 55 men, while the quarterly return of June 30 and the inspection return of the same date show a strength of 54. The first two agree in showing 4 officers and 51 non-commissioned officers, musicians, and privates present. The third shows 3 officers and 51 of lesser rank present, and the fourth 4 officers and 50 of lesser rank. There is disagreement, then, between the contemporary returns over the number of the garrison at the end of June. Yet it is evident that its nominal strength at that time was 4 officers and 51 men of lesser rank, although one of the 55 may possibly have been absent. There is no reason to suppose that there was any alteration in this number between the end of June and the 15th of August. Without venturing to say that there is any unquestionable preponderance of evidence that the strength of Heald's company, including himself, on the latter date, was 55 rather than 54. From a consideration of all the factors involved, I incline to believe that it was. In the calculations and statements that follow, therefore, it is to be understood that the total number of regular soldiers involved in the massacre is reckoned as 55. Including the commander, then, 96 persons comprise the doomed company which evacuated the fort on the morning of the 15th of August. These fall logically into several groups, varying greatly as to size. John Kinsey, a neutral and non-combatant. Wells, the leader of the Miamis. The 9 women and 18 children of the company, the 12 Chicago residents composing Heald's militia company, and finally the 55 regulars. The first 2 of these require but little consideration here, as the fortune of each has been discussed elsewhere. Wells was slain, while Kinsey passed unscathed even through the carnage around the wagons where not another white man escaped with his life. There is no uncertainty respecting the fate of the women of the company. The subject has already been discussed at length, and only a brief recapitulation need be given here. Number name Fate Sisley, Mrs. Heald's Negro slave killed in battle Mrs. Fielding Corbin killed in battle Mrs. Heald returned to civilization Mrs. Helm returned to civilization Mrs. Lee returned to civilization, ransomed by DePayne and Buisson at Chicago Mrs. Holt returned to civilization, possibly the woman ransomed along with Mrs. Lee Mrs. Burns returned to civilization Mrs. Simmons returned to civilization Mrs. Needs died in captivity of exposure and hardship. Of the 18 children in the massacre, only a very incomplete record can be made from the sources that have come to light thus far. Neither Mrs. Heald nor Mrs. Helm had children. Each of the remaining 7 women, with the possible exception of Mrs. Corbin, had 1 or more. Mrs. Burns had several, some of whom bore her former name of Cooper, probably several belonged to Mrs. Lee. Black Cicely had 1 child, and Mrs. Simmons 2. 1 child each at least, and perhaps more, belonged to Mrs. Needs and Mrs. Holt. 12 of the children perished in the massacre, most of them in 1 wagon at the hands of a single fiend, and 6 survived it. One of these, the Needs child, met perhaps the saddest fate of all the company, being tied to a tree by the savages and left behind to die. The other 5 returned with their mothers to civilization. 2 of them belonged to Mrs. Burns, and 1 each to Mrs. Simmons, Mrs. Holt, and Mrs. Lee. Unless additional sources of information shall come to light, the names of most of the members of the Chicago militia will forever remain unknown. All of the 12 men were killed in the combat except the leader, Thomas Burns, who, badly wounded, was killed a short time later by a squaw. One of his followers was his stepson, Joseph or James Cooper. Lee, the farmer, must have been another, although there is no positive record to this effect. Of the others, the names of but 1 or 2 can be conjectured even. If the boy who escaped from the April massacre was the son of Lee, he doubtless was one of the militiamen. Probably Louis Fettel, who lived at Chicago from 1803 to 1812 and then disappeared from recorded history, was still another. In this connection, the conjecture may be hazarded that Pierre Leclerc, the half-breed interpreter, was one of the 12. Griffith represents that he deserted at the beginning of the fight, for which Griffith at first intended to kill him, but relented when Leclerc pleaded that it was the only way to save his life. If the suggestion that Leclerc was one of the militiamen be accepted, the statements of Heald and others that all of them perished must be regarded as erroneous. This view, however, would explain Heald's statement in his journal, otherwise erroneous, that 12 militia, including Wells, perished. I have reserved for consideration last the most perplexing problem, that concerning the regulars of the Fort Dearborn garrison. The names of the 55 men are preserved in the muster roll of May 31, 1812. The only man who attempted to record the names of those who survived the battle was Helm, and his list, while incomplete and inaccurate in various respects, furnishes the most convenient starting point for determining the names of those slain in the battle and the subsequent fate of the survivors. Excluding Burns, the militiaman, Helm lists the following 27 survivors: Captain Nathan Heald, Lieutenant Lena T. Helm, Sergeant John Crozier, Sergeant W.M. Griffith, Corporal Joseph B. John Smith Pfeiffer, Private Presley Andrews, Private Fielding Corbin, Private James Corbin 10, Private Daniel Doherty 11, Private Dyson Dyer 12, Private Nathan Edson 13, Private John Fury 14, Private Richard Garner 15, Private Paul Grummo 16, Private W.M. N. Hunt 17, Private James Latta 18, Private Michael Lynch 19, Private Elias Mills 20, Private August Mort 21, Private John Needs 22, Private Joseph Knowles 23, Private Thomas Poindexter 24, Private John Smith 25, Private James Starr 26, Private John Suttonfield 27, Private James Van Horn. As far as it goes, the accuracy of this list is confirmed by other sources of information, except for Andrews and Starr, concerning whose fate there is no mention elsewhere. On the other hand, Woodward, whose information was obtained from Heald and Griffith, names Dennison and McCarty, the former badly wounded, among the survivors. The report of the 9 survivors who arrived at Plattsburgh, New York, in 1814, adds the name of Hugh Logan, while David Kennison, who was buried at Chicago with great civic pomp 40 years later, evidently survived the massacre despite the fact that his name does not appear in any of the sources. We have, therefore, the names of 31 survivors, 3 more than there actually were. Probably 2 of the names in error are those of Andrews and Starr, mentioned above. Possibly the third is that of Logan, although obviously there can be certainty respecting none of the 3. A comparison of this list with the complete garrison roll discloses the names of those certainly slain in the battle, 24 in number, as follows: Surgeon Isaac Van Voorhis, Ensign George Ronan, Sergeant Isaac Holt, Sergeant Otho Hayes, Corporal Thomas Forth, George Burnett Pfeiffer, John Hamilton drummer, Hugh McPherson drummer, Private John Allen 10, Private George Adams 11, Private Asa Campbell 12, Private Stephen Draper 13, Private Nathan A. Hurt 14, Private Rhodias Jones 15, Private Samuel Kilpatrick 16, Private John Kelso 17, Private Jacob Landon 18, Private Frederick Locker 19, Private Peter Miller 20, Private W.M. Moffett 21, Private W.M. Prickett 22, Private Frederick Peterson 23, Private David Scherer 24, Private John Simmons. There were 26 slain, however, according to Heald's report and journal. The 2 names needed to complete the list are probably those of Presley Andrews and James Starr. We have thus reached, although not with absolute certainty in every case, the names of 29 survivors and the 26 who lost their lives in the battle. It remains to follow the fortunes of the former and trace out those who perished in captivity and those who finally returned to their countrymen. Helm's list is of little assistance here, for his account of the fate of the survivors is both incomplete and inaccurate. The fate of 12 of the 27 on his list is left a blank. Opposite the names of 5 stands the word released, and opposite 2 deserted. In fact, 11 perished in captivity and 18 returned to civilization. It is evident that Helm was ignorant of the arrival of the 9 Fort Dearborn soldiers at Plattsburgh in the spring of 1814, and of the news they brought of their comrades who had perished in the wilderness. One of the 9 he records as killed, one as released, and leaves the fate of the others blank. Why Hunt and Crozier should have been set down as deserters is not apparent. In fact, the former froze to death in captivity, while the latter effected his release through the agency of a friendly Indian. The most practicable starting point for determining the names of those who perished in captivity and those who escaped from it is afforded by Heald's tabular statement. This indicates that 27 survived the battle, 9 of whom died in captivity, and 18 returned to civilization. Our study, however, has already established the names of 29 survivors of the battle. On the assumption, which there are strong reasons for making, that the 2 not included in Heald's statement perished in captivity, the names of all belonging to the latter class and of all who were restored to freedom can be determined. Elsewhere, Heald gives the names of 9 who died in captivity. They were Richard Garner 2, W.M., N. Hunt 3, James Latta 4, Michael Lynch 5, Auguste Mort 6, Hugh Logan 7, John Needs 8, Thomas Poindexter 9, John Suttonfield. The accuracy of this list is confirmed by other sources with respect to all except Poindexter, concerning whose fate there is no mention elsewhere. The 2 names wanting to complete the list of those who perished in captivity are Micajah Dennison and John Fury, who according to Woodward were so badly wounded in the battle that but little hope was entertained of their recovery. With this list of 11 as our basis, it is possible to determine with reasonable assurance the names of the men who were tortured to death the night following the massacre. Forsyth's letter shows that Lynch and Suttonfield, badly wounded, were killed by the Indians, while en route to the Illinois River. The report of the Plattsburgh group of survivors accounts for the death of 4 others. Hunt froze to death. Needs died about the middle of January, 1813, probably from the hardships of his captivity. Logan and Mort were tomahawked because of their inability to keep up with their captors. The 5 remaining, Garner, Latta, Dennison, Fury, and Poindexter, are evidently the men who were tortured to death at Chicago. Concerning the first 2, we have the positive statement of Woodward in his letter to Proctor. The belief that this was the fate of the others rests, obviously, on inference and deduction. To determine the names of the 18 who returned to civilization, it is now necessary only to eliminate these 11 names from the list of the 29 survivors already given. Concerning the return of 12 of the 18, there are positive records, while that of Kennison may safely be inferred from our knowledge of his later life and death at Chicago. Of the other 5, no mention or record has been found, and their names are obtained only by the process of analysis which has already been gone through. In the list that follows, these 5 are given last: Captain Nathan Heald, Lieutenant Lena T. Helm, Sergeant W.M. Griffith, Corporal Joseph Bowen, Private James Corbin, Private Fielding Corbin, Private Dyson Dyer, Private Nathan Edson, Private Paul Grummo 10, Private Elias Mills 11, Private Joseph Knowles 12, Private James Van Horn 13, Private David Kennison 14, Sergeant John Crozier 15, Private Daniel Doherty 16, Private Duncan McCarty 17, John Smith Pfeiffer 18, Private John Smith, father of the preceding. Although some doubt necessarily attends the conclusions which have been reached concerning the fate of some of the members of the Fort Dearborn garrison, practical certainty attaches to the conclusion reached concerning the great majority, and it is believed that the present study is as accurate and complete as can be made with the sources of information at present available. The study may properly conclude with a tabular recapitulation, embodying the conclusions reached as to the names and fate of the regular soldiers of the Fort Dearborn garrison on the morning of August 15, 1812. Nathan Heald capped, returned to civilization 2. Lena T. Helmed Lute, returned to civilization 3. George Ronan ensign killed in battle near the baggage wagons 4. Isaac Van Voorhis surgeon's mate killed in battle near the baggage wagons. Isaac Holt sergeant killed in battle 2. Otho Hayes sergeant killed in battle in individual duel with an Indian 3. John Crozier sergeant returned to civilization 4. W.M. Griffith sergeant returned to civilization. Thomas Forth corporal killed in battle 2. Joseph Bowen corporal returned to civilization. George Burnett Pfeiffer killed in battle 2. John Smith Pfeiffer returned to civilization 3. Hugh McPherson drummer killed in battle 4. John Hamilton drummer killed in battle. John Allen private killed in battle 2. George Adams private killed in battle 3. Presley Andrews private killed in battle 4. James Corbin private returned to civilization 5. Fielding Corbin private returned to civilization 6. Asa Campbell private killed in battle 7. Dyson Dyer, Private, returned to Civilization 8. Stephen Draper, Private, killed in Battle 9. Daniel Doherty, Private, returned to Civilization 10. Micajah Dennison, Private, badly wounded in battle, tortured to death the ensuing night 11. Nathan Edson, Private, returned to Civilization 12. John Fury, Private, badly wounded in battle, tortured to death the ensuing night 13. Paul Grummo, Private, returned to Civilization 14. Richard Garner, Private, tortured to death the night after the massacre 15. W.M. N. Hunt, Private, frozen to death in captivity 16. Nathan A. Hurt, Private, killed in battle 17. Rhodias Jones, Private, killed in battle 18. David Kennison, Private, returned to Civilization, died at Chicago in 1852-19. Samuel Kilpatrick, Private, killed in battle 20. John Kelso, Private, killed in battle 21. Jacob Landon, Private, killed in battle 22. James Latt, a Private, tortured to death the night after the massacre 23. Michael Lynch, Private, badly wounded, killed by the Indians en route to the Illinois River 24. Hugh Logan, Private, tomahawked in captivity because unable to walk from fatigue 25. Frederick Locker, Private, killed in battle 26. August Mort, Private, tomahawked in captivity 27. Peter Miller, Private, killed in battle 28. Duncan McCarty, Private, returned to Civilization 29. W.M. Moffat, Private, killed in battle 30. Elias Mills, Private, returned to Civilization 31. John Needs, Private, died in captivity 32. Joseph Knowles, Private, returned to Civilization 33. Those. Poindexter, Private, tortured to death the night after the massacre 34. W.M. Prickett, Private, killed in battle 35. Frederick Peterson, Private, killed in battle 36. David Scherer, Private, killed in battle 37. John Suttonfield, Private, badly wounded, killed by the Indians while en route to the Illinois River 38. John Smith, Private, returned to Civilization 39. James Starr, Private, killed in battle 40. John Simmons, Private, killed in battle 41. James Van Horn, Private, returned to Civilization. Bibliography.